Forced to marry the crippled Alpa king on wedding night, he stood from his chair and said, "The sky above the kingdom was heavy with clouds, dark and low, as if warning the land below of the storm to come. In the distance, the Alpha King's castle rose from jagged cliffs like a monument to both fear and power. Its towers pierced the gray sky, and the walls, carved from black stone, seemed older than time itself. Whispers among the villagers called it cursed, haunted by the sorrow of those who had served the king and failed. None dared enter without reason, for the stories of the king's temper and his unmatched power were known far and wide. Inside the castle, preparations for a wedding were underway. The halls were decorated with heavy, dark velvet drapes and golden candelabras that cast flickering shadows across the walls. The air smelled of incense and old wood mixed with the faint metallic scent of armor stored in the hallways. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day a young noblewoman would be married to the Alpha King himself. The woman, barely 19, walked through the grand corridor, her gown trailing softly over the cold stone floor. Her hands were clenched slightly, her knuckles white with tension. She had not come here willingly. Her family had arranged this marriage for political gain, trading her freedom for safety and influence. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and defiance. She had grown up with tales of the king, how a cruel twist of fate had left him crippled years ago, how his temper could turn a loyal servant into nothing but ash, and how his presence demanded both awe and caution. The king awaited her in the great hall. From the high-backed chair at the center he appeared still and unmoving, like a statue carved from stone. His limp was obvious, yet there was a strength in him that no chair could contain. His dark eyes were sharp, almost piercing, as if they could look straight through her thoughts and see the fear hidden behind her composure. The courtiers in the hall bowed or averted their eyes, whispering to one another, yet the woman felt as though the air between them was heavy, alive with something unspoken. When she entered, he did not rise. He glances rested on the arms of his chair, knuckles white, but his presence was so commanding that she instinctively lowered her gaze. She had expected cold indifference, perhaps a few words of politeness, but the silence was heavier than any words she had imagined. "Approach," he said finally, his voice low, steady, and undeniable. It was not a question. She obeyed, her steps measured, heart racing with curiosity and unease. Every eye in the hall was on them, but it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the space between her and the king. When she reached the foot of his chair, she looked up at him. He studied her in a way that made her heart twist, as if he were reading the story of her life from her face. Bray. His gaze was both terrifying and magnetic. "You are different than I expected," he said, and there was no malice in his tone, only an intensity that made her shiver. She began, but he raised a hand, silencing her before she could finish. "Do not speak yet. Tonight is not about words." Breaths. "Tonight is about truth." Her pulse quickened. She had heard stories of kings who spoke in riddles or declared sudden judgments. She did not know if this was the beginning of such a test, or if he simply wished to observe her like one would observe a rare bird. Either way, she felt exposed, as if the walls of the hall had disappeared and she stood naked under his gaze.
For hours, the wedding passed in a blur of ceremony.
Vows were spoken, rings were exchanged, yet each word felt hollow compared to the weight of the king's eyes on her. His face was calm, composed, yet she sensed the storms he kept locked within. There was no outward cruelty, but there was no warmth either. The man before her was a puzzle, broken yet unyielding, vulnerable yet terrifyingly powerful. When the festivities ended, the courtiers withdrew, leaving the great hall silent except for the crackle of the torches. The shadows danced along the walls, long and distorted, like creatures waiting for something. She stood before him, uncertain of what was expected next. Brett. Then he moved. The motion was slow, deliberate, yet filled with a presence that made her heart catch. He rose from his chair, and the room seemed to grow smaller around him. Though his legs carried the weight of the chair's absence poorly, every movement held a quiet, commanding strength. Destined, he stood taller than she expected, not because of his height, but because of the intensity he radiated.
"You think I am weak," he said, voice low and steady, carrying across the hall. "Because I sit."
You believe my body limits me. But you are wrong. She froze, unsure whether to speak or move. His eyes bore into hers, revealing a depth of power and pain that few had survived looking at.
"I will not ask for your fear," he continued, "nor your pity. I will ask only for your truth."
Breaths. And in return, you may see me as I truly am. The words lingered in the air like smoke, filling the hall with a heavy, undeniable tension. She felt her chest tighten, not with fear alone, but with something she could not name. Curiosity, fascination, and a strange spark of something deeper. The king slowly lowered his hand, yet his gaze never faltered. Breaths. "Tonight," he said, "you will see what lies beneath the throne, beyond the chair, beyond the stories you have heard. You will see the Alpha I have become, and the man I remain." The noblewoman's mind raced. She wanted to ask questions, to challenge him, to flee, yet she found her feet rooted to the ground. Something about the man, the king, was magnetic, drawing her forward with the pull of a hidden tide. She realized that she had underestimated him, as the stories often misled those who did not truly see him.
He walked toward her then, slow but steady, each step deliberate.
The cracks in the stone floor echoed in the silent hall, and she counted each one as if it were a drumbeat in her chest. She could see the effort it took him to move, the pain hidden beneath the controlled mask of his face. And yet he did not falter. Each step spoke of endurance, of willpower, of a quiet, terrifying strength that few could match. When he was close, he stopped, mere inches from her. She could feel the heat from his presence, the faint scent of sandalwood mixed with something raw, untamed. His hand reached out, not touching, just hovering near her shoulder, and she realized that the tension was not just in her body, but in the air itself, thick and alive, vibrations. "You are not here by choice," he said, quietly, almost a whisper now, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. "And yet, here you stand. That is courage. Whether you know it or not. That is strength, even if you doubt it." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, though she did not understand why. Perhaps it was the truth in his words, or perhaps it was the strange recognition that they were both bound by fates not of their choosing. In that moment, the air between them was neither hostility nor comfort. It was an acknowledgement of shared struggle, a silent promise that they were about to face something greater than themselves. He stepped back slightly, breaking the tension just enough for her to breathe. Then slowly he returned to his chair, but this time he did not sit fully. He leaned against the armrest, still commanding, still powerful. Breaths. "Tonight," he said, voice low but firm, "you will not only witness my strength, you will witness what it means to survive, to endure, to rise even when broken. Perhaps you will see a piece of the man I am, hidden beneath what the world has made of me." The noble woman swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to protest, yet no words came. Instead, she nodded slightly, understanding for the first time that this marriage was not merely about politics or duty. It was a meeting of two fates, intertwined by forces neither could control, yet bound by something far more powerful than fear or obligation. The torches flickered, casting long shadows across the hall. Outside, the storm clouds gathered, and the wind howled against the stone walls. Inside, two souls, one forced, one wounded, faced each other with a quiet intensity that could not be ignored. Brash, and in that shared silence, something began to shift. A fragile, tentative spark that neither had expected, yet both could feel. And then he spoke, finally, words that would haunt her dreams for nights to come. "You think tonight is the beginning of your story with me?" "No. It is only the opening of a journey that will change everything you believe about strength, loyalty, and love." The noble woman's breath caught. The weight of his words, the presence of the king, the storm outside, all combined into a moment that felt suspended in time. She did not yet understand what lay ahead, what trials, temptations, or revelations would test them. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Bert, outside the hall, the wind screamed and the storm approached. Inside, two lives, bound by fate and the harsh hand of circumstance, stood on the edge of a journey that would lead them into darkness, into light, and into the depths of one another's hearts. And in that moment, the Alpha King, once thought broken, rose from his chair and declared, with a voice that cut through the silence like a sword, "You will learn in time what it truly means to stand beside me." The noble woman felt the weight of those words settle over her, and though fear still lingered, a strange thrill ran through her veins. She did not yet understand the man before her, the castle that seemed alive, or the path that fate had carved for her. But one thing she knew with certainty: her life, her heart, and her destiny had forever changed tonight. The castle was quiet after the storm had passed, though the walls still trembled slightly from the echoes of wind and rain. The noble woman wandered its long corridors, her fingers brushing over the cold stone walls, feeling the chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She had expected a castle filled with warmth, laughter, or at least orderly life. Instead, she found silence, shadows, and whispers of the past. Every step she took felt heavier, as if the castle itself were aware of her presence, judging her, testing her. She paused at a large arched window and looked down at the courtyard below. The storm had left puddles on the stone floor, reflecting the moonlight in uneven, shimmering patterns. The wind carried a faint scent of wet earth, smoke from the torches, and something else, something she could not name. It was the scent of history, of sorrow, and perhaps of secrets buried long ago.
Her thoughts returned to the king. The way he had risen from his chair that night had left her shaken.
There was strength in him she could not understand. Power in him that did not come from his body, but from something deeper, something unseen. She wondered how a man could appear so broken to the world yet radiate such dominance, such control. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway as she continued her exploration. She passed tall bookshelves lined with leather-bound tomes, their titles faded with age. Some were so ancient the pages crumbled when touched. She felt a strange pull toward them, a curiosity that mixed fear with fascination. Tentatively, she opened one, its pages filled with strange symbols and sketches of creatures she had only ever seen in myths. The castle held knowledge, power, and perhaps curses that had been forgotten by the outside world.
A sudden sound made her start.
Breath. From a corridor nearby came a soft shuffle, almost like a whisper of movement. She held her breath, straining her ears. Then a servant emerged from the shadows, bowing quickly. "My lady," he said softly, his voice trembling. "The king! He is expecting you!" Was she meant to be summoned? Or was this another test? She followed the servant down a winding staircase into a hidden part of the castle, a wing she had never noticed. The walls here were darker, the air colder, and the torches burned with a steady, almost hypnotic light. When they reached a large door, the servant knocked lightly and stepped aside. The noblewoman entered, her eyes widening at what she saw. The room was circular, filled with mirrors that reflected her image in countless variations. Each mirror seemed slightly different, some showing her reflection as it truly was, while others seemed to shimmer with shadows hiding fragments of memories not her own. And then she saw him. The king sat in the center of the room, his chair positioned so he faced every mirror at once. His eyes caught hers immediately, sharp and piercing, and she realized that this room was a test, not of strength, but of perception. "Welcome," he said softly. "You have begun to see the castle. Now it is time to see me." Confused, she stepped closer. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This," he replied, "is where the past and present meet, where truths are hidden, and where one must look beyond the surface to understand power. Look into the mirrors. You will see not only yourself, but pieces of me you cannot find anywhere else." Her eyes scanned the mirrors. In one she saw the king as he had once been, strong, fierce, almost untouchable. In another she saw the accident that had crippled him, a battlefield covered in smoke, screams, and the fall that had left him weak in the eyes of the world. In a third mirror she saw him alone, sitting in a shadowed room, a single candle burning. His face was full of pain, but also of something else, determination, pride, and a deep, aching longing for it. She stepped back, overwhelmed. "Why show me this?" she asked. "Because," he said, rising from his chair despite the obvious effort it cost him, "if you are to be beside me, you must understand. Strength is not measured by the body. It is measured by the heart, by the mind, by the courage to endure when everything around you seeks to destroy you."
The noblewoman felt a pang of guilt.
She had judged him, assumed weakness because of his limp, because of the whispers of the court, and yet here he was commanding the room with his presence, revealing layers of himself that few had ever seen. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly, his gaze softening ever so slightly. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. She wanted to, she thought she should, but trust was not something given lightly, not to a man whose world was shrouded in fear, power, and mystery. "You will learn," he said, "that trust is not given, it is earned." "Perhaps we will begin." For hours they moved through the room together, observing the mirrors, discussing fragments of the king's past, and sharing moments of silence that spoke more than words could. She began to see him not as a figure of fear, but as a man of depth, complexity, and pain. And she realized that she was beginning to care. Not because she was forced to, but because she could not help herself.
Yet even as they connected, the castle reminded her that danger was never far away.
In the deepest corners of the hallways, shadows shifted. Whispers traveled along the walls, faint but insistent. Something was moving in the darkness, watching, waiting for the right moment. Late in the night, the king led her to the balcony overlooking the forest. Moonlight spilled over the cliffs, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine. The castle below seemed smaller from this height, the world beyond both vast and dangerous. Breath. "Do you see it?" he asked. "The kingdom is beautiful, yes, but it is fragile. And so are we in our own ways." She nodded, mesmerized. I never understood how much strength it takes to rule,"
she admitted.
But he looked at her then, eyes shadowed but intense. Strength is not in dominating others. Ray, strength is in surviving the betrayals, the loss, and the pain. In learning to stand when everything wants to see you fall. Ray. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the truth of his words. She realized that she, too, had been forced into a life not of her choosing, struggling to survive in a world that demanded compliance and obedience. And in that shared struggle, she began to feel a connection, fragile yet undeniable, to the man before her. Suddenly a noise broke the moment, a sharp, almost metallic sound echoing from the halls behind them. The king's eyes narrowed. "Stay here!" he commanded, his voice low and steady. "Do not move!" Before she could protest, he disappeared into the shadows, moving with a speed and grace that contradicted his physical limitations. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited, the wind whipping her hair, the moonlight illuminating the fear and anticipation in her eyes. Moments later he returned, dragging a figure she could not yet see clearly. The man, cloaked in dark garments, collapsed at the balcony's edge, unconscious, or perhaps worse. The king's face was calm but controlled, the faintest tremor of pain in his hand as he steadied himself against the stone. "They thought," he said quietly, "that weakness would stop me, that my body could be used against me. They were wrong." The noblewoman stared at him, awe and fear mixing in her heart. The king, once thought fragile, had confronted danger, defended the castle, and shown her that true power was not measured by appearances. "Are you hurt?" she asked, stepping closer despite the fear. He shook his head. "I am alive. That is all that matters. But this is only the beginning. The castle is full of secrets, and not all of them welcome guests so easily." She realized then that her life had changed irrevocably. She was not just a noblewoman forced into a political marriage. She was a witness to power, a partner in survival, and perhaps unknowingly, someone who could reach the heart of a man who had learned to trust no one. The night deepened, and the castle seemed to breathe around them, alive with shadows, whispers, and untold stories. She felt a mix of fear, excitement, and anticipation, knowing that the days to come would test them both in ways she could not yet imagine. Pan. And then he spoke, his voice carrying a weight she could feel in her bones. "You will see the castle's truths, its dangers, and its secrets, and if you survive them, you may also see the man I truly am."
The noblewoman swallowed hard, heart racing.
Round. She had entered this world thinking she was a prisoner, yet she felt something she had not expected, a choice to face the unknown, to witness the shadows and secrets of the Alpha King, and perhaps to understand him in a way no one else could. As the first hints of dawn touched the castle towers, she realized one undeniable truth. Her life, her heart, and her destiny were bound to this man and this place. And whatever lay ahead, she would never be the same again. The morning light filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the castle, casting thin silver beams across the stone floors. The noblewoman woke to a quiet stillness that felt different from the night before. The storm had passed, leaving only the whisper of wind through the high towers and the soft glow of dawn that painted the castle walls in muted gold. Yet, even in this calm, she felt the weight of what she had witnessed. The king, despite his physical limitations, had confronted danger, defended the castle, and revealed a glimpse of his true strength. She dressed quickly, her mind restless. There was so much she did not understand. The king's past, the powers hidden within the castle, the dangers that lurked in shadow, yet she also felt a pull toward him, a strange, undeniable connection that both frightened and fascinated her. or a pair of watch. She wondered if he felt the same or if the intensity she had seen in his eyes was reserved only for the mysteries he kept close. She found him in the library, seated in his usual chair, though he seemed smaller in the vast room. The morning sun touched the spines of ancient tomes, casting long shadows across the floor. He looked up as she entered, eyes catching hers with that same piercing intensity she had learned to recognize.
"Bull! You are awake," he said, his voice calm but edged with a quiet authority. "Good."
"We have much to do today."
She stepped closer, trying to hide her nervousness. I want to understand.
Everything. The castle, the mirrors, the secrets you showed me last night. He studied her silently for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded.
Curiosity is a dangerous gift in a place like this, he said, but it can also be a path to understanding.
Come. He rose, each movement deliberate, controlled despite the effort it required. She noticed how carefully he placed his weight on his legs, how the slightest misstep seemed to demand concentration, yet he did not falter. There was power in restraint, she realized, a lesson she had never truly understood before. He led her through winding corridors she had never seen, past tapestries depicting battles and heroes long forgotten. Every step seemed purposeful, every shadow alive with memory. Finally, they reached a hidden chamber, smaller than the halls she had explored, but filled with artifacts of the king's life: armor, old weapons, sketches, and journals. "These are pieces of my past," he said quietly, running his hand over a polished sword. "Each one is a reminder of what I have endured." She moved closer, fascinated. Inspiration. You were a warrior?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I was," he said, "and I still am in ways the world cannot see. But strength is not always measured in battles won. Sometimes it is measured in endurance, in survival, in the courage to face betrayal, loss, and the limitations imposed upon us."
She could see it in his eyes, the depth of pain, the memories that had allowed him to rise again.
And yet, she sensed a vulnerability he did not show to the world, a part of him that was waiting for someone to see it and understand.
You trust me, she said quietly, almost as a question, because you let me see this. He paused, studying her.
Trust is not freely given. It is earned. And you are beginning to earn it. But do not mistake what you see for weakness. It is not weakness to feel. It is strength to endure and to continue, even when the world has tried to break you. The noblewoman felt a warmth in her chest she could not explain. She had entered the castle thinking she would find only a cruel, broken king. Instead, she found someone complex, haunted, and yet incredibly alive. She realized that her fear was slowly being replaced by curiosity, admiration, and perhaps something more, a tentative connection she did not fully understand. As the day passed, he guided her through the castle's hidden passages and secret rooms. She learned how the king had survived the accident that had crippled him, the treachery of a trusted ally, the battles fought not only with swords, but with wit and courage. She saw his strategies, the careful thought behind every decision, the layers of intelligence that commanded loyalty and fear alike. And yet, even as they walked together, their proximity created tension neither could ignore. A brush of his hand against hers as he passed an object, a shared glance over a dusty tome, the quiet moments in the shadows where words were unnecessary. All of it stirred something inside her, a mixture of admiration, awe, and a growing attraction she could not name.
By evening, they returned to the grand hall. The torches flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls.
Outside, the moon rose, pale and luminous, bathing the castle in silver light. The noblewoman felt both excitement and unease, knowing that every moment in the castle was a test, every interaction a lesson in power and understanding. "You are learning," the king said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But there is more than knowledge here." Break. There is trust, courage, and connection.
These are harder lessons to master.
She looked at him, sensing the weight behind his words. "Connection?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "To survive in this world, one must understand not only the castle, the threats, and the powers around us, but also the hearts of those we stand beside. That is the lesson many never learn, and the lesson I hope you will not fail." She swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but words failed her. Instead, she nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning. She was beginning to see the man behind the king, the man who had endured betrayal, pain, and isolation, and she felt the stirring of something fragile yet powerful within her heart. Just as the tension between them seemed to settle into quiet understanding, a sudden sound broke the stillness, a crash from the far end of the hall, followed by a muffled shout. The noblewoman's heart leapt. She turned to see the king moving with surprising speed and precision, despite his limp, toward the source of the disturbance. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice sharp yet calm. "Breath. Do not move." Before she could protest, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows like a shadow himself. Her pulse raced as she waited, the echoes of his footsteps fading into silence. Then slowly he returned, dragging a man who struggled weakly. The king's face was steady, controlled, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he balanced his weight. "They thought," he said quietly, "that weakness could be used against me, that I could be overcome easily. They were wrong." The noblewoman stared at him, awe and fear mingling in her chest. This man whom the world had labeled crippled and weak had confronted danger and emerged victorious. And yet she saw in his eyes a shadow of pain, a reminder of the trials he had endured and the battles still to come. "Are you hurt?" she asked, stepping closer despite her fear. "I am alive," he replied. "That is enough. But know this, the castle holds many secrets, and not all of them welcome the living." Her thoughts raced. She had come to the castle expecting a forced marriage, perhaps a cold, distant man. Bath. Instead, she found someone with courage, depth, and a complex heart. Break. And she realized that the connection between them was growing, subtle yet undeniable, as though the castle itself were guiding them together, testing their patience, trust, and courage. The night deepened, and they moved to the balcony once more. The moon cast long shadows across the cliffs, and the wind carried the scent of earth, rain, and pine. She felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration, knowing that their bond, fragile though it was, had begun to grow. "Breaths, you see the castle," he said softly, "and you have faced shadows and danger. But the true test is not here, nor in the walls, nor in the mirrors. It is within ourselves. To trust, to endure, to see each other not as prisoner and king, but as partners in a world that will challenge us at every turn." Her heart beat faster. She understood in that moment that she was no longer merely a visitor or a captive. She was part of something larger, a story of survival, courage, and perhaps love. And as she looked into the king's eyes, she felt the first stirrings of a bond neither time nor circumstance could easily break. Yet even in this fragile connection, danger was never far. From the shadows beyond the balcony, she thought she saw movement. A figure watching, waiting. unseen but present. She did not speak of it, but the unease settled over her like a cold shroud. The king noticed her glance, but said nothing. Instead, he placed a hand lightly on the stone railing, his presence steady, reassuring, yet tense. "You have taken the first steps," he said quietly, "but the path ahead is long and fraught with trials. You must be ready to face not only the castle and its secrets, but also the darkness that will seek to divide us, to test what we have begun to build together." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking into her. She understood now that her life in the castle would not be easy. Inspiration. She would be tested, tempted, and challenged at every turn. And yet, a small, fierce part of her welcomed the challenge, drawn to the man who had revealed so much, yet kept so much hidden. As the first light of dawn touched the castle towers once more, she realized one undeniable truth. She was no longer just a noblewoman forced into a marriage. She was a partner, a witness, and perhaps a companion in a story that would shape both their fates. But whatever lay ahead, she knew she would face it. Standing beside the Alpha King who had risen from his chair and challenged the world, and her heart at the same time. The castle woke slowly that morning, its halls bathed in pale sunlight that spilled through tall windows. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, silent except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk. Inside, the noblewoman moved carefully through the corridors, her mind tense with the events of the previous nights. She had begun to understand the depth of the Alpha King, the man behind the throne, the warrior behind the chair. She had seen his pain, his strength, and the shadows that clung to him like a second skin. Yet even as she walked, she felt unease pressing against her chest. The castle's secrets were many, and though she had glimpsed some of them, others remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And she knew, without fully understanding why, that today would test them both like never before. The king was waiting for her in the great hall. He stood at the window, one hand resting lightly on the sill, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Even in stillness he exuded strength, presence, and an unspoken command that filled the room. When he saw her, he turned slowly, his dark eyes holding a mixture of resolve, concern, and something softer. An emotion she had begun to recognize, though she dared not name it yet. "Prepare today," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "We face what has been waiting for us since long before you arrived." She followed him closely, her steps echoing on the stone floors. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "There are those who believe my weakness gives them power over me," he explained. "They plot, they scheme, and they think the castle's walls will protect them. But walls do not stop the truth. And today, the truth must be seen." He led her through passages she had not yet explored, past the armory where the weapons gleamed in silence, past halls that seemed alive with memory and shadow. With every step, she felt a growing tension in the air, a pressure that pressed down like the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting, judging. Finally, they entered a grand chamber, larger than any she had seen before. The ceiling arched high above them, supported by stone pillars carved with intricate patterns of battles and kings long gone. At the center stood two figures, guards of the court loyal to a faction she had not yet understood. Their faces hardened, their eyes wary and calculating. "You," the king said, his voice cutting through the silence like steel, "have chosen to challenge me." The noblewoman's heart quickened. She felt a mixture of fear and anticipation, knowing that whatever happened next would shape the rest of their lives. The guards moved, hesitant, unsure if they were facing a crippled king or a man whose will was far stronger than appearances suggested.
"I do not seek conflict," she said softly, stepping closer to the king.
"But I will stand with you as I promised." The king's eyes softened for the briefest moment, and she saw gratitude there, buried beneath layers of pride, pain, and determination.
He nodded slightly, acknowledging her courage without words.
Then he moved forward, every step deliberate, commanding, as though the very ground obeyed him. The confrontation was not violent, yet it held the intensity of a storm. Words were exchanged, accusations and truths laid bare, each revealing the depth of betrayal that had lingered in the castle for years. The noblewoman watched, heart in her throat, as the king's authority and intelligence became clear. He did not rely on strength alone. He relied on strategy, wisdom, and the ability to read the hearts of those who opposed him. At one point, a hidden mechanism in the chamber was triggered, and a door slid open to reveal a secret passage, one that led to the heart of the castle's defenses. The king gestured to her. This is where the final test lies. Together. Her hand brushed against his, not out of necessity but instinct. She felt the warmth of his presence, the steadiness of his touch, and in that moment she knew that her connection to him had grown beyond duty or fear. She was beginning to care, deeply, and she realized that the man before her was as much her partner as he was her king. They moved through the passage, their steps careful but swift. The walls seemed alive, murmuring in whispers of the past, shadows flickering in the torchlight like memories trying to escape. And then they reached the chamber at the heart of the castle, a place of ancient power, where the secrets of the kingdom and the king's own trials had been preserved for generations. Inside, the air was heavy, charged with the energy of old magic and old promises. The noblewoman felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear but from the weight of history and the importance of the moment. Here, at last, she understood the full measure of the Alpha King's strength. It was not just in his body, his throne, or his titles, but in his resilience, his courage, and his capacity to protect and endure. This is where it ends, or begins anew, the king said quietly, turning to face her. Do you understand what this means? She nodded, though her heart raced. I understand that you are not defined by what others think, she said softly, and that strength can take many forms. He studied her, and for the first time she saw the depth of emotion he had kept hidden. Gratitude, longing, and something that reached beyond pride. Trust burst. You have learned much, he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet intensity. And you have chosen to stand with me even when fear could have driven you away. That choice makes you stronger than many I have known.
As they stood together, the chamber seemed to breathe around them, shadows retreating in acknowledgement of their unity.
The noblewoman realized that she had not only witnessed the king's power, but had become part of it. Their bond, forged in fear, curiosity, and growing understanding, had transformed into something real, something neither of them could deny. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the chamber's entrance, a figure stepping into the torchlight. The noblewoman tensed, ready for conflict, but the king's presence beside her calmed her. Together, they faced the figure, and the truth was revealed. It was not an enemy seeking to harm them, but someone who had long awaited this moment, a figure who held the final piece of the castle's mysteries and the king's past. You have proven yourselves, the figure said, bowing slightly. The trials are over.
The secret's revealed. Now the kingdom may know peace, and those who remain true may stand together.
The noblewoman exhaled slowly, relief and exhilaration mingling. She looked at the king, and in his eyes she saw a reflection of her own emotions, pride, relief, and a quiet joy she had never expected to feel in this place of shadow and power. The king reached out and took her hand, not with obligation but with intent, with a gesture that spoke of partnership, trust, and respect. We have faced the darkness, he said softly. And we have endured, but the true journey is only beginning. Together we can shape what comes next, not as prisoner and king, but as equals, as partners, as—" His voice faltered slightly, and she saw the vulnerability hidden beneath his strength. She stepped closer, placing her other hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth beneath his armor. "As companions," she finished for him, her voice gentle but firm. But he smiled then, a small but genuine smile, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a smile that carried all the pain, struggle, and triumph of a man who had endured so much, yet had found someone willing to see him as he truly was. The sun rose higher, bathing the chamber in golden light. Shadows receded, and the castle seemed to exhale, its walls alive with history, strength, and renewal. Outside, the forest shimmered with morning dew, and the distant mountains stood silent, eternal witnesses to the events that had unfolded. For the first time, the noble woman understood that her life had changed forever. She was no longer simply a visitor or a forced bride. She was a partner, a confidant, and perhaps in ways she dared not yet name, a companion in a story that would continue far beyond the walls of this castle. The king, still standing tall despite the weight of his past and the memory of his injury, turned to her once more. "Tonight," he said softly, "we rest. Tomorrow we build. Together." Rotation she had never known. The castle, the secrets and the trials had forged a bond between them, one that would withstand fear, betrayal, and the passage of time. She had witnessed the depths of his heart, the shadows of his past, and the light of his resilience. And in return he had seen hers, her courage, her loyalty, and her capacity to stand beside him when the world demanded more than she thought she could give. As they walked together through the halls, the noble woman realized that the Alpha King, once thought broken, had risen not because of power alone, but because he had chosen to trust, to endure, and to open his heart.
And she had chosen to stand with him, not out of fear, duty, or obligation, but because she believed in the man he truly was.
Outside the castle, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the promise of new beginnings, of challenges yet to come, and of a love forged in shadow, strengthened by trust, and destined to endure. And as the sun rose fully over the kingdom, the noble woman and the Alpha King walked side by side, no longer bound by fear or circumstance, but by choice, courage, and the unbreakable bond they had formed in the darkness and light of the castle they now called home.